Today we're going to talk about fields and how to customize them for your particular content. One of the greatest strengths of Drupal, of course, is its ability to structure content, to take data and break it up into individual bits so that it can be stored, organized, sorted, filtered, and displayed, and also entered in a way that makes sense to content editors. So we break up content into individual bits of data. And the way we store that data in Drupal, those individual bits, is in fields. So that means that fields are critical for structured content. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to treat them seriously and actually think about your content when you're figuring out how your fields should be structured. Looking at core functionality, what's available in core, what's available in the contributed projects that are out there, and then custom solutions if you want to do that to really craft your fields to be exactly what your content needs. First, an introduction. I am Rick Hawkins. I'm a triple certified Drupal expert, and I lead the Drupal team at Solemn, which is a medium-sized business and tech consulting company. We're based out of Seattle. We have about 40 offices around the US and like a dozen in other countries, Australia, Japan, Germany, etc. I'm one of the organizers of the Seattle Drupal Users Group, and been involved with the community for quite a while. Recently helping to organize the the Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit, which happened a couple weeks ago. I maintain a couple dozen modules on Drupal.org, and strangely, I don't think any of them are related to fields. They're mostly security related, which is another passion of mine. But so I gave this presentation a couple weeks ago at the Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit in Seattle. So, but I have tweaked it a bit since then, so there are a few additional items. So just talking about what fields are in Drupal, they're actually made up of three different things. There's a type, which defines the general behavior of the field, how it's stored, and that sort of thing. There are widgets, which is how content is input or entered. And then there are formatters, which is how the content gets output. And in Drupal 8, all of these are defined using plugins. So it's very easy to create new types, new widgets, and new formatters. And I will demo that later. When you need to create a new field, since Drupal 10.2, you've got this new lovely interface, which allows you to select one of the 22 fields that Drupal core provides out of the box that are exposed to content editors. And so this provides some really basic fundamental types. You've got plain text and formatted text, numbers, Boolean values, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot built into core already. And then there are additional contributed fields that provide very specific solutions for specific types of data. Many of you have probably used the address module. It's used a lot in e-commerce because it is an excellent way to store data that is related to a physical location. And others that provide field types that are popular in the contrib space are things like the geofield module, which stores latitude and longitude coordinates, the name field module, which stores human names, office hours for locations and when they're open. Smart Date offers another approach to handling dates outside of the normal the date fields or the date field types provided by core. And then something like there's the SVG image field module, which provides a new field type for storing specifically for storing SVG images. So one thing I wanted to point out is that when we think about values in fields in Drupal, we sometimes think of them as a single value. And they're actually composed of multiple properties within those values. So when I'm talking about fields, I'm going to use the term value and property. So a multi-value field could have, in this case, you can see there are 3 values, and each value has 3 properties. And so the properties in the core fields, for instance, many of them only have 1 property. So you take something like a Boolean field type, there's 1 property. It's on or off. And in a lot of cases, that is called value in Drupal. That property is called value. So you can see things like even the plain text field is just a single property. It makes sense that the date range field would have 2 properties because it needs to have a beginning date and an end date. And formatted text, as opposed to plain text, needs to have 2 properties because it has a value for the content, and then it needs to store what the text format is for outputting. And then the link field has 3 properties, and then you can see the one that has the most is the image field type provided by Drupal core that stores additional data related to the image, including its width and height. So in contributed fields, something like the address field has 14 properties. As you've probably seen that when you go to enter an address, you're entering a city, a state, a country, all the items that you see listed here. And the name field has 6 properties, office hours. So these are ones I mentioned earlier. You can see just like the number of properties that each of these field types has. And so the way that this is stored in the database is in individual tables. So this is from the name module. So you can see, as I showed here, there are 6 properties related to name fields. And there they are. They're highlighted there. So you have things like given name or first name, family name, etc. So those are the 6 properties that the name module provides. And they're all stored in a single table in the database in 6 columns. So I just have to call out the name field module because I think it is a really good example of a module that does things really, really well when figuring out what is needed for a particular type of data, in this case, names of human beings. So it provides, as you can see here, a title field, first name, middle name, last name, although it doesn't use those. It doesn't say first name, last name. You can set those to be the labels, which I've done here, but it uses given and family name because that's more universal for non-Western names. And so I suggest that if you have, I think almost every site that I've worked on, I've needed to have a person content type of some sort. And that person will have a name. And in the old days, you might have created a couple of fields, first name, last name, and then you have those as separate fields. You enter them. Then you need to find a way to sort of concatenate them when you're outputting them. If there's some challenges with getting those to work the way you want. And then when you want to add middle name, you add another field, and so on. You can see that the name field just gives you all of those out of the box as individual properties. So you're not actually storing those in separate tables in the database either. You're storing them all in a single table, as you saw above right here. So my recommendation when building a person content type is to hide the title field because you don't want users to have to type in the full name and then all the individual components. You can build the full name out of the individual components and make that the title of the node. So you can use the automatic entity label module to do that. It's very easy, and I can demo that later. But you can see here the name field, I've actually added 2 additional properties or elements to this name field, preferred name and alternate name. And the name field allows you to sort of extend it to bring in additional fields, which can then be used for creating name output. And name output is done in the form of name formats, which are like date formats, but for names. And so, the same way that date formats are kind of arcane and just like tokens that you put together and then it outputs the date, the name formats work the same way. And so you can see the default format here is pretty complicated, but that's the one that comes with the module. And honestly, most of these are just, I'm able to use these out of the box. But if I do need custom formats for names, I can create my own and then just choose those any place that you would choose formats.
Do you want to switch to slideshow view to just make things a little bit bigger?
Yeah.
I think play from current slide.
Okay, I'm just concerned it's going to show me this, which is, oh, I see. That works well. Okay, I'm seeing got it. Thank you. So name formats are super, super powerful, and it's a way that the creator of this module really thought about the needs of people who are working with names. And that's what I'm encouraging all of you to do today with your own content. It also even has things like name list format. So if you want to combine lists together, how do you want to do, or combine names together, how do you want to do that? So this is really useful if you want to have, you know, commas separating, but then an and before the last one. Do you want to, if there are more than 3, just make it the first name and then et al, that sort of thing. So super powerful module. I recommend it anytime you need to have a human name. So I was really trying to avoid doing a live demo for this presentation, but it's just going to be a lot better if I do it. So we're going to, that's what we're going to do. So the example that I kind of said in the session description was a recipe site where you've got, actually I'm not going to the live demo yet, is a recipe site where you have ingredients and you need to have multiple ingredients that belong to a particular recipe. So Drupal core, of course, comes with Umami, which is a demo site that is a recipe site. So it has an ingredient field. So how does it do it? You can see here, it's just a string, and everything is all together. So you have 400 grams of whole wheat pasta just as a string. And this is it's just a demo site, so it doesn't really matter that much how the data is stored. But you probably want to structure your ingredient field differently from that. You probably want to break up the individual elements so that you're not storing it as a single field. So you probably want to use something like a quantity and then a unit and then an ingredient name and then maybe something additional. So the reason you might want to do this is for scaling the recipe. If somebody wants to double the recipe, if you've got the value stored as a quantity, you can actually then do math on it. You could do unit conversion on the unit field, on the unit property, turning ounces into grams, for instance. So that could be just something the user can click and it'll change the units on the recipe. You could also organize, filter, or search on specific ingredients if the ingredient name is broken out into a separate field, and especially if you're using, say, an entity reference to a list of ingredients, you could then have, at the bottom of your recipe, here are other recipes that have eggplant or something like that. Formatting is a lot easier. For example, if the quantity is set to be, you want the user to enter 0.5, so you can do math on that later, but then you can output it as a fraction. And then lastly, styling. If you wanted to do something different with the individual elements, the individual properties of that field, the field values, you could, say, bold the ingredient name or do something like that. And the fact that you've gotten them broken out really allows you to do that, the formatting and the processing that you'd probably want to do. So how would you do that if you were going to think about doing this for a site, a hypothetical recipe site that you're building? Back in Drupal 7, we would have used something like field collections or multi-fields to make this sort of multi-property field. The modern approach would be, a lot of people like paragraphs, and so paragraphs is, despite its name, it basically provides a new entity type that allows you to create a paragraph. It's fieldable, so you can add fields to it, and then you reference that paragraph from your node, from your recipe node, for instance, in this case. And then there are contributed modules that have field types that will allow you to use multiple properties. For example, there's some very specific ones. There's one called reference value pair, which is an entity reference field combined with a plain text field. So if that fits your needs, that's going to give you exactly what you want. There's one for reference date combo field, which is an entity reference field and 2 dates. So there are solutions out there that are targeted for very specific use cases. They're not super likely to be your exact use cases, and so we'll talk about how you can build something of your own to match exactly with what you need. There is another one called double field, which allows you to combine 2 fields from a supported list of field types. And I say supported list because it doesn't work with all field types, and not even all field types provided by Drupal core, but it does work with a lot of them. I haven't used any of these modules on a project, but I have played around with them, and they seem like they could be good no-code solutions if they meet your needs. And then, as I mentioned, a custom field type is also a good option for getting exactly what you want. Yes?
I used double field on one project, and it did seem to work.
Okay. Good to know. For the recording, the double field module seems to work well, at least on one project that reported. So there is another module called custom field, and this looks really promising because unlike paragraphs, there's no new entity and there's no additional fields that are attached to those. It's just a single field with multiple properties like I was showing earlier. And I'll give a demo of this later also, but this looks very promising for being able to create much more efficient custom fields where you're combining individual element properties into a single field value. So there actually is a recipe module in Drupal, which I was not aware of, but it's quite old. You can see up in the upper right corner there, first commit was in 2002 by Moshe Weitzman, and there is a most recent 8 plus release, and then there's a Drupal 7 version also. This module predates Content Construction Kit and the Field API, but it has, of course, been modernized to work with Drupal 8 and beyond. So how does that module approach ingredients? So here we are taking a look at the same sort of recipe that we saw in Umami, and here you can see it's broken up into individual properties. We have exactly what I was describing: quantity, unit, the name of the ingredient, and then there's sort of an additional note field which then gets tacked on to the end of the ingredient. And so this is going to give you a lot of power along the lines of what I was talking about earlier for manipulating that data, outputting it in a way that that is along the lines of what you need. So I suppose if this matches exactly what you need, probably use this. This provides the submodule that it provides is called ingredient, and that's what it does, is create a field type for ingredient and a field widget and a field formatter. Okay, so here's the demo. We're going to talk a little bit about creating new field types. So if any of you used Drush Generate before, it's a very powerful way to build out the scaffolding for a lot of these kinds of things. It's excellent for plugins, and so you can use just Drush Generate to create a field.
We still see your slide.
Thank you. That's better. Thanks.
Can you make reading font bigger?
Is that better? All right.
Thank you.
So it basically just walks you through everything you need to be able to create a new field. And by that, I mean a field type, a field formatter, a field widget. So I'm going to call this Oops. And the field label. So the example I'm going to use is going to combine two different properties together. If you needed, for instance, a telephone field with a label next to it for, say, like home, work, mobile, you want to label that telephone value. So I'm going to call it telephone labeled. And so here it refers to subfields. That's the same thing as the properties that I've been talking about. It's just the individual elements that are going to make up this field. So in this case, I don't want 3, I want only 2. And it's going to ask what label do I want to call the first one. And I'm going to call this one number. And then I can choose the machine name. You can choose whatever you want. That's going to appear in the database table, as I showed earlier. The standard within Drupal, as I said, is to just call it value for the sort of the main value. So I'm going to stick with that convention, and we'll call the telephone number value. And it asks you what type you want, and then we'll say telephone. Do we want to limit the allowed values? No. Do we want to make it required? Yes. If they enter anything for this field, if the telephone number is missing, that's going to be considered. That's a required field. Okay, so label for the second one, we're going to call this. We can call it label, and the machine name label is fine. And in this case, I'm going to want it to be text. And we do want to limit values for this one because we want to specify work, home, mobile, just to select a list of options. We want to make it required. No, let's make it optional. And then it asks about a settings form for the field storage. And I'm going to just say yes to all of these just so you can see that it's going to scaffold all of this out for me and give me sort of dummy settings that will be available for the field type, the field widget, and the field formatter. So you can see it's just asking me, do I want settings for all of those? There are additional field formatters that you can create. I'm just going to say yes so we can take a look at those. And it builds out the scaffolding for that. And if we take a look at our module that it just created for us, Badcamp, we look at the plugin definitions. We'll look at the type first. You can see there it is, telephone labeled. And it uses the old annotation approach, so just generate hasn't been updated, I guess, to use the new attribute approach, which is more modern way that plugins are defined, but this is still supported for now. So in this case, you can see it's using all that information that I entered, and I can, give it a proper description. And it's saying which widget it's going to use by default, which formatter it's going to use by default. And I can say category. Demo. I created a category earlier, and I'll show you what this is going to do. So you can see this class has been set up to extend the base class, the base field item class, which is defining a field type. For something like this, I've had good luck, especially with more complicated field types than telephone, extending an existing field type that Drupal core provides. So in this case, I might change this to extend the telephone field type, and then probably a lot of this stuff could become simpler. I could just reuse what core already has, and then if core gets updated, that will come along. Sometimes it just means you need to do less duplication of work. But you can see it's added this foo setting for me, and we've got some fields. The field settings form has a bar setting. And then when we take a look down here, we'll see the allowed label values. And so it generated 3 for me, but I'm going to change these to home. And as you can see, we've got field widgets and field formatters also. But let's take a look at this field type now that we're going to go and create one of these new labeled telephone fields. So I have just a basic Drupal site here. I have a person content type where you could see that I have added some of those fields for a name field. Make it a little bigger. And there's those additional fields that I added. So if I go to create a new field, you can see, let's see.
So you have to enable the module?
Yeah, I've got to enable it, thank you. And actually, I have this other demo field module too that I'm going to enable. That's the one that defines the new category for fields. And then Bandcamp.
Probably Bandcamp should depend on demo.
It probably should, yes. So you can see, so here's that demo category that I created earlier, and I told, and I changed the class or the field type definition to use this demo category. So if you look here, you can see some other ones that I've created and that I can demo. But here's that telephone labeled one that I just added with Drush Generate. And I'm going to say allow unlimited. And you can see here are those settings that it made available for me should I want additional settings on this field. There's the foo value, here's the bar value. We saw those in the code. So now if I go up here to create a person, you'll see here's my name field, everything name field provides. And here's the phone number, and I have a number and a label just the way I want. And I can, do the usual things with these multiple values. But it's not the easiest thing in the world to create a new field type, widget, formatter, but it has never been easier in the history of Drupal, as I showed, just for some fairly simple needs like this. And then you can take it from there. I mean, Drush Generate will get you a good part of the way. If you need to do further changes, you can just dig into the code and make the changes you need. But you could get a lot more complicated, of course, with these sorts of things. And a couple of these other examples that I can show illustrate that.
Does it have views integration?
Views integration, it was the question. Yes, and those values will all be available within views, and I can show that also. So if I go to create a new field and I choose this demo option, you can see I've got some additional field types that I've defined. And like anything when you're working with computers, naming things is about the hardest. So you can see that I've got these kind of clunky names, entity reference with extra fields. And this is one where I wanted an entity reference, but I had additional sort of strings that I wanted to add to it, like a checkbox. So I just said extra fields, and it's got a whole selection of them that you can use. Here, this is a plain text field with just a Boolean value. So you can, whoops. I can say, and so here's the setting that I chose for that one, the selected label. So we'll say flagged, we'll call that. And now the foobar field, if I go to create a person, foobar field at the bottom, you can see has a string and then this flagged field that I set. again, that was built using the exact same pattern that I showed with just generate earlier. But I can go to views and so if you want to output things individually, the individual properties, you could choose a formatter. You can see that here are the formatters that I told it I wanted when I was going through Just Generate, but you could create your own formatters if you wanted to have, for example, just the telephone number without the label. You could create a formatter for that would only output it, and then that would be selectable here. So if you want to show individual properties, your formatters are going to be your best bet. So the default one will be fine. And you can see here's that setting again. Again, not doing anything, but I haven't entered anything, so there's no data there. But the phone number would be output with this label using the formatter that I chose. So one advantage, another advantage to this, speaking of views, is if you use paragraphs and you want to show multiple phone numbers, for instance, they're stored as an entity reference, which means you're getting into relationships territory. You've got to go in here, add a relationship to that paragraph, and then, as you probably have seen before, you end up with multiple versions of the same item just because of the way the SQL query works. When you set up a field using the method that I just showed, it'll be available, everything will be available in a single output as one value, and it won't be output multiple times. Then you can use the normal, separators to separate the values. So, speaking of paragraphs, I was just going to kind of show what that looks like if you take that approach. So paragraphs, you can see I did create a phone number paragraph type earlier. I've got the same fields. I've got a phone number and a label, but as a paragraph. So if I went to my person content type, now I'm choosing paragraphs, and this referencing the paragraph entity type, we're going to say phone numbers. And just to show what how that looks different, so you can see here's the field that I just created. We have the same fields. I've got homework and mobile available here as a label. Paragraphs does have this nice collapse option, which you would need to do some custom code if you wanted to provide that sort of functionality. You could put this in a collapsible details element, or at least the all but the first field, so at least you could see like the main value, but then any additional values could be sort of collapsed down, and you would have to open it up to be able to see them if it makes it easier. And then they've got this sort of nice drag and drop where you could move items around without seeing everything. So there are some nice UI features for when you're working with paragraphs this way, but this is essentially building the same thing using that approach rather than a custom field type. One thing that you may have noticed here, or demo, this has a custom icon, and I added this for this demo. There is a good article that shows you how to do that. Add an icon for your custom field. I just followed the instructions in this article. There's the URL, which I'll share the slides so you can take a look at that. but it essentially, it was super straightforward. You create an SVG, you create some CSS, and it will automatically output that icon for your custom. In this case, it was a group of field types, but if you only have one, then it'll be the icon for just that one field type. And that's right here. You can see there's this field type categories, and so all it does is you define what it should say. And in this case, I called it demo. You point to a library. Demo icon is the library that I created, which points to this CSS, and the CSS is an inline or an inline SVG that I just need to target with a class. So pretty straightforward. It's a lot nicer than, if you look at this, you can see the name field module could use an icon. The ingredient field module, same thing. If you create your own, you're going to get this sort of generic puzzle piece, which isn't as fancy. So, yes?
Do you have a list of, like, I don't know. I mean, I was just wondering if there's like a list of common field types that you would use instead of paragraphs. Because I have people that are using paragraphs for any and every damn thing, and it just seems like there's got to be a field better. There's got to be a better option for this than a paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I listed were literally the ones that I could find, and they were very narrow in their scope. So that's why, your best bet is probably taking the plunge and building your own if you can. Otherwise, that custom field module could be a good option as an alternative. Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of a definitive list of field types out there, but I did a search for modules on Drupal.org that seemed to provide a field type, and that's the list I found. So I do want to call out this. There was a presentation done in 2020 by Chris Vanderwater. He did it at DrupalCon, which was online that year, and MidCamp. The MidCamp video is the only one that I think is still available, but it's really worth watching because he talks about how all of this is related to your data model. And as you can see, he's got some provocative things to say about your data model in particular. But specifically, he talks about using a custom field type versus paragraphs, and why you might choose one over the other. But I borrowed this slide, hope he doesn't mind, from his presentation that is about paragraphs versus a custom field type. You don't need a new entity. You just write a plugin, like I just showed, and it's a superior data model 99% of the time, according to Chris. So watch that presentation. I think you'll find it really helpful as sort of additional information to what I'm saying. And he also says easier said than done. Well, like I say, it's never been easier. So if you give it a try if you want. I did want to talk about another way to define fields outside of the normal field API. How are we doing on time? Ooh. I guess I'll talk about this really quickly. So in Drupal, you know that there are certain fields on nodes, for instance, that you didn't define, and the list is there. So the title, the author, the ones like promoted to front page, sticky at top of lists, these are what are called base fields. And they're defined in the entity programmatically. And so what that means is they're available for all bundles within an entity type, so all content types, but they can be enabled or disabled as needed. So you don't have to have the promoted to front page field if you don't want it, but it is available for all of them. So the title field, for instance, in Drupal is defined this way. It's just a programmatic approach to defining a field rather than going through the UI. And so you can do the same thing by adding your own base fields to an entity type. So if you wanted to, in the example I have here, if you wanted to have a display title that was different from the title, the normal title field on nodes, for instance, and you want that for all of them, you could go in the UI, create a new display title field, and then create that for every field or every content type that you have. When you create a new content type, you're going to need to remember to add this. Or you could add it as a base field, and you'll get it for free on every content type that you have. So it's just a matter of, it's really small, I'm sure, but just defining in a hook implementation, it's called entity base field info. You just define new base fields that you want. When that module gets enabled, your new base field will be created as a new column in the database. So it's stored very efficiently along with all the other data in Drupal and not as in a separate table. Another way to customize things for your particular content in Drupal is to use third-party settings. So this allows you, this works with field widgets or field formatters. If you want additional settings that are not provided by Drupal core or whatever is defining the widget or the formatter, you could create a new widget or formatter that extends the one that you want to sort of build on top of. But a lot of times it's like, I just want one little additional checkbox to be available. You can use third-party settings for that. So, so this is an example that is just straight from Drupal, the Drupal documentation for how to do that. You'll implement field formatter third-party settings form or field widget third-party settings form. And so I have actually done that for, let's see. So you can see here's an implementation of that. For the link field type, I created a new setting called My Third-Party Setting. It's a checkbox. Whenever a new link field is created, and that was a field formatter, so that would be managed display. So if I come here, you can see here's my new field, and here's my third-party setting right here. It's just right there with the others. So it's super easy to add additional settings, which you can then do something with, because those are passed through in the theme, so you could do something different based on a checkbox that has been set here, or whatever other field you want, field value. So third-party settings, base fields if you need them. So take a look at your content, figure out how you want to break it up, what makes the most sense for how it needs to be organized and stored, searched, filtered, output, how do you want your content editors to be able to enter it, think about how to break it up, and then consider what the available options are. Take a look at Drupal core. Probably 9 times out of 10, that's going to meet your needs. Contributed modules can, if you have a name for a person, just use the name field module. If you have an address, use the address module. There are solutions out for very specific content types. If that doesn't meet your needs, take a look at the multi-property options I mentioned, including that custom field module. If you want something on every bundle within your entity type, consider defining a base field. And then if you just need additional settings for a widget or a formatter, you can add third-party settings, as I just showed. And then, if you really want to craft exactly what you need, create a custom field type, as I showed. And if you do all that, you will find a way to make the content in Drupal in your fields match what your content needs. I think we have maybe a bit of time for questions. 1 minute? Yes?
I was going to say, if you use paragraphs as a substitute for a custom field, you do get view modes on paragraph if you're going to be displaying it differently in different spots. Not necessarily a reason, but that's...
Yeah, the comment was around the view modes that you get. Because paragraphs is an entity, you get all the normal things that you get with entity types in Drupal.
And my question was, if you're going to use an entity reference on a custom field, where do you get into inception problems? And because imbues the relationship as kind of.
The question is around recursiveness or inception-like behavior when you're referencing another entity within a custom field that you've built that has an entity reference. I don't think there are any more concerns about it there than there would be anywhere else. You mean like if you referenced its own entity?
Or do something very like.
Yeah.
I didn't see entity reference notion when you generate field.
Okay.
I mean, probably it's not possible. Okay.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I think for a small site that's never going to have more than 300 nodes, it's probably not worth going through this. But if you have a site that's going to be around for a few years and grow, then it's important to think about the efficiency before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I'll be around if you have any further questions. Just stop me.